Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GameFound over the next week. If you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some news and announcements that I just found out about over the past week, and I do have a few items I think you might be interested in. First one here is that the third installment of Nemesis has been announced. This is going to be launching on GameFound before the end of the year. The big difference with this one is that players are highly trained Marines with all of the best gear, which means that you're going to feel a lot more powerful, but players are also taking the fight into alien territory as they are diving into an alien hive. This means that you're going to have much larger hordes and much more powerful aliens to go up against, so all the stakes are going to be higher as well. But if you are interested in this one, or if you do have the previous releases and you're looking for something new, this is definitely one to look forward to, and this one is going to be called Nemesis Retaliation. And the next bit of news is that the next Tiny Epic game has just been announced, and this one's going to be Tiny Epic Cthulhu. So this one's going to be taking that Cthulhu H.P. Lovecraft trope that we see so much in board games and making a tiny epic version of it. So this one's going to be a cooperative game where the players are going up against all these different elder gods and also trying not to lose their sanity while trying to survive. Not a whole lot of info on this one yet, but if you are a fan of the Tiny Epic series, or if you just want to know more about this specific game, I will be covering it in a lot more detail during the week of its launch, and this one is expected to launch on December 4th, which isn't too far away. So if you do want to know more, I will be covering it very, very soon, and just make sure to subscribe down below so you don't miss out on that episode. And if you do enjoy tiny games designed by Scott Elms, there's actually another one launching in December, and this one is called The Last Lighthouse. This one's actually a solo game where you're trying to keep the lighthouse lit and protect it from going out. Like I said, this one's also designed by Scott Elms, but this one's being released by Button Shy Games, which means this is going to be even tinier than the Tiny Epic series, and this is going to fit into one of those little wallets. So if you are interested in either of these, I will be talking about them more during the weeks of their launch. And of course, you can subscribe down below and click that bell icon if you want to get notified. And I do have a few more updates for you, but they all have to do with upcoming board game conventions. And the first one that I want to touch on is PAX Unplugged, because I did mention this one in a couple previous videos, and I did mention that I did want to attend this one, but after trying to figure out my flight and a place to stay, I just can't figure out any options that fit within my budget, so I don't think I'm going to be able to make this one this year, unfortunately, because it does look like a ton of fun, and I do have a lot of FOMO on this one. So if you are attending this one, you'll definitely have a blast, and I'm super jealous, so just make sure you have a ton of fun for me. Unfortunately, you won't be able to see me there, but there is still hope, because there are a couple other conventions that I will definitely be attending, because I already did book my flight and figure out my lodging for the LevelUp retreat, which is going to be at the start of February of next year, so also coming up very, very soon here. And I have been to this one before, and it's a ton of fun, and I highly recommend going if you are able to attend. But there is a reason that this one's called a retreat and not a convention, because if you've ever been to any convention ever, you've probably noticed that most of the floor space is just filled up with different booths of different companies trying to sell you something or trying to pitch you on their next big game. Don't have any issues with that. That can also be a ton of fun in its own right, but this one is a lot more focused on just playing games and meeting people and just having a blast. And if you look at the way the floor space is set up at this retreat, you're just going to see a ton of different tables with games already set up on them, with people there ready to help teach you those games, while also providing a whole library of games that you can just go and choose from if there's any other games that you want to try. But of course, if you see people that want to play a game that you might already know and love, you can also offer up your services, teach them how to play the game, maybe play with them as well, because like I said, this is all about meeting people and just having fun playing games in the hobby that we all share and enjoy. It's also a great opportunity to meet many of those familiar faces that you might know from the industry, because there are a lot of designers and content creators that will be attending this event as well, especially because it is hosted by Alex over at Board Game Co. And he's getting a lot of help from different content creators and people from the community who are going to be running different events and just helping to make this as fun as it possibly can be. I really do hope to see you there, and I will definitely play games with anyone that wants to play games. So if you are interested in attending this one, I will have a link to the webpage in the description below. But there is one more convention that I do want to mention, because I will also be attending this one, and this is called the ClaringCon. And this one's quite a bit smaller than the two I just mentioned, but it's also a lot closer to home, at least for me, because this one is going to be run just a little bit north of Toronto, so it's quite a short drive for me. So if you are located in the area, This is definitely one that you might want to check out, and it is a newer convention, so I did want to give it a bit of exposure here. And this one is more of a retreat, so this one is going to be more focused on meeting people and just playing and trying new games. There's also going to be a ton of different contests where you can play to win, so you might even come home with some free games as well. And I will also have a link to this one in the description below. As always, I do like to give a quick mention to Alex over at Board Game Co. Even though I know I did already mention him, and if he does anything more in the industry, this video is just going to be 90% Alex at Board Game Co. So Alex, you need to slow down. Except not really, because I do enjoy attending those retreats, and I do enjoy working with you to keep track of all these upcoming campaigns, because I post these videos every single week, but Alex posts a video at the start of each month letting you know of the heavy hitters that are to come. We do keep track of all these games individually, but we periodically update each other just to make sure the info that we're giving you is as up to date as possible. So if you do want a little bit advance notice on some of the games launching each and every month, you can go ahead and subscribe to Alex, because he will definitely have you covered, and he offers a ton of other content as well, going into reviews and playthroughs, as well as behind the scenes content like interviews with different designers and giving you some behind the scenes info into upcoming releases like the DCeased Zombicide game, which I will be telling you more about in this video. But Alex already has a video with the designer going into a lot of the details of the game that haven't been explored yet. Go ahead and check him out. I'll have a link to his channel in the description below, and if you do like his content, make sure you're subscribed. But that is pretty much everything I have for an intro, and we do have quite a few games launching this week. So without further ado, let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on November 14th, and this one's called WARTBURG Paris 1879. And these are actually two different games that are going to be offered in this campaign, with both of them featuring that escape room style of gameplay. WARTBURG is going to put players into solving a murder mystery. You're going to be trying to use different items and clues, as well as an app, in order to make your way through the narrative and hopefully discover the appropriate suspect. Paris 1879 does work very similar to this, but rather than players trying to solve a murder, they're instead trying to solve the crime of some stolen precious art. Players are going to be going through a lot of the same sort of style of riddles and problems, but of course each of these are going to be adding in their own unique twists and their own unique puzzles that will be unique and thematic to that specific story. Both of these will be providing you with a bit of a story as you visit the different locations and make new discoveries that push that narrative forward. Of course, this is a cooperative game, and players will be working together to solve these mysteries, and if this one does sound interesting to you, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 14th, we have Firesiege, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes just 1 to 2 hours to play. And this one is a cooperative game that has a really interesting, unique element that I will come back to in just a second here. But essentially in this game, players are working together to essentially defend a tower in the center of the board, because as the enemy gets activated, they're going to be moving down these 3 different paths that you can see that are yellow, red, and green, and then slowly making their way to the center of the board. Players are going to lose if any of the enemies reach the center, or if an enemy needs to be spawned but there's no more left in the supply, or if a hero dies. And then finally, if they run out of time, because there is a time tracker that's going to be advancing periodically throughout the game. But the interesting aspect of this game comes with the player's actions, because each player is going to be playing as their own individual hero, but then each player is going to have their own upgrades and special abilities that they can unlock, as well as their own set of action tiles. And the cool thing here is that players are always going to have 3 action tiles to choose from on their turn, and they're always just going to be picking one to activate. But you're going to be drawing these from a bag, and one side of the tile is going to have the actions that you can perform, then the other side of the tile is going to have the instructions for the enemy activation. So whatever tile that you do end up choosing to activate is not only going to determine your actions, but also the actions of the enemy. But the cool thing here is that I said you will be drawing these from a bag, and whatever side of the tile that you see first is the only side that you're allowed to look at. So you're going to be putting these in a little stand in front of you so that you can see that side. When it's your turn, you're going to be choosing one of these tiles to activate with only partial information, but the other players are allowed to tell you which tiles that they would prefer more than others, but they can't tell you exactly what they see on the tile. So you're going to have to use their bit of information with the information you have to try and determine which tile that you want to choose. Of course, these actions are going to help you push back against the enemies in various ways, and the way that you do that is by deploying different units out on the board, moving those units to strategic locations, and then attacking the enemy or the enemy nests. Players normally aren't able to move through the walls in this game, so you can also perform actions to breach walls or to repair the walls as well to prevent any enemies from taking shortcuts. And then these actions can also have other effects like raising your stats on various different tracks. And these tracks are very important because they're going to affect the power of your main actions, such as moving, deploying, and attacking, because there's a movement track that's going to dictate how much movement you get when you perform that movement action. And then there's the deploy track that's going to dictate how many units you can put out with a single deploy action. And then of course the attack track will have a damage modifier, allowing you to perform more or less damage depending on where you are on that track. Also, there are a few different types of units that players can deploy out on the board. There are your main hero units, and then there are these support units that do add additional strength and attack power if they are in the same location where you are attacking. During attack, you're also going to be rolling a die that can have other effects and modifiers to that attack, adding a little bit of luck into the equation. The cool thing about these tracks is that they are another thing to link players together in the cooperative experience because they are shared tracks, which means that some players might increase certain stats, while other players might spend those stats in order to upgrade or perform some special actions. The game also starts with drawing 6 different goal cards that players are going to have to complete in order to win the game, with each of those having different requirements in order to fulfill that goal. Of course, drawing different combinations of these goal cards will change your strategy and add variety from game to game as you try to fulfill their unique objectives. And if you are interested in this one, you'll definitely want to follow along to get an additional set of miniatures added to your pledge, and I will have this campaign linked in the description below. Also launching on the 14th, we have Singularity.exe, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive card battler where players are fighting over control over the digital world. Something that's really interesting about this game is that it actually has absolutely no randomness. There's no random card draws, there's no card shuffling, and there's even no dice rolling. The way the game works is that each player is going to be creating a team of 5 heroes at the start of the game, with each of those heroes having 3 different program cards. Each of the heroes play a little bit different from each other, so creating different combinations is going to create a very different team, and will change your strategy from game to game. Players aren't going to be mixing these heroes together. Instead, you're going to have them in separate stacks face up in front of you, but you can decide what order you want each of the cards to be in each of the individual stacks. This is important because when you go to perform actions on your turn, you can actually use any of the cards that are visible to you, but when you do use one of the cards, you're going to be performing its various effects, and then the card that you chose to play is going to be going to the bottom of the associated deck. Since you can use any of the cards that are visible to you, that means that you can use the next card in that stack, but you can never use the same card twice. So if you fully go through an entire stack, you're no longer able to use that stack for the rest of your turn. Of course, these cards can have a wide variety of effects to help you or harm your opponents, and although some of these cards can generate resources, most of them do come at a cost. So even though you can play as many as you want, you will be limited by the amount of resources that you're able to spend in order to activate them. This means that understanding your characters and timing when certain cards become available to you so that you can combo them together with other cards is super important in this game. This creates a lot of opportunity to become an expert with a certain combination of characters, but of course your strategy might change depending on the opponent that you're going up against. But also if you do want to put a little bit of a handicap on yourself, say if you're playing with someone who maybe hasn't played the game before, you can always choose to play with characters that you are less familiar with. There's also some universal cards that players can swap into any of the heroes if they want to tweak them in various ways, and there is also a solo and cooperative mode that is offered through a mobile app if you are more interested in that cooperative experience, but if you are interested in this one, I will have it linked in the description below. Also launching on the 14th, we have Wish, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 40 to 80 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive game where players are different genie traveling across the land, collecting different crystals that they can use to fulfill the wishes of the people that they meet along the way. This is a game that I did film in advance, but I've never rolled the footage for this one yet. So if you're wondering why I'm dressed a little bit different, that's the reason. But I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this is a competitive game where players are going to be playing as their own individual genies, with their own player board and special ability, as well as unique set of actions that they can perform. Each of the players' board are going to have a few different action spots that they'll be able to place tokens on their turn, with each of these action spots having one of two actions that you can choose from. Players will only be able to choose one of those two actions for each spot, and players will be limited to the number of spots that they can actually perform an action on, but you can unlock an additional one throughout the game, giving you more options as the game goes on. But players will be using those actions to move around out on the main board to try and gather resources that they need to fulfill various wishes. But also on the board, there's going to be a caravan that starts at the beginning of this dotted line, and then it's going to be moving down that line throughout the game, and the end of the game is triggered once that caravan reaches the final position. Each round, you're going to be drawing a caravan card to indicate how much movement that caravan is going to be moving down that path, but then it also indicates any of the trade actions that can be performed with that caravan if the player moves their genie onto a space where that caravan is currently located. Each location also offers a number of different colored tokens, and players can use the resource action in order to gather the resources at that location, and then of course trade those resources in order to either make trades with the caravan or to fulfill the wishes of various cards that will be out on display beside the board. Each of these cards does come in a particular color, and in order to fulfill the wish of that color, you need to visit a location that has a meeple matching that color. I really do love how the location of your genie really does matter in this game because it affects almost every single action that you can perform. So if you're able to move to those proper locations to get you the tokens of the right colors you need to fulfill the wishes of a meeple that's located in your location, not only do you get to claim that card and the victory points associated with it, but you also get to perform its special ability, and you also get to claim the meeple that was located at that location. And this is another really interesting part of the game where you can also move to other locations that might have different monuments that players can build, and if you visit a location with a monument that is not currently built, then you can assign the appropriate combination of meeples to that monument in order to build it. What this does is puts those meeples that you claimed back out onto the board so that they can be used again to fulfill more wishes. But anytime that another player uses one of these meeples to fulfill one of their wishes, that's going to be scoring you a victory point as well. The more of these you're able to put out, the more of your meeples will be dominating the board, increasing the likelihood that other players will be forced to use them. Each player is also going to have a secret objective card that can earn them additional victory points if they're able to fulfill it before the end of the game, and then players will be scoring up all their victory points from their cards and any other victory points that they gain throughout the game in combination with their secret objective, and the player with the most victory points once that caravan reaches the end of the board wins the game. And of course, if you're interested in this one, I do have it linked in the description below. Also on the 14th, we have DCeased, a Zombicide game. This plays 1 to 6 players and takes about 1 to 2 hours to play for each scenario. And this one is also our Discord pick of the week. And that's no surprise because Zombicide is an excellent series of games, and I have owned quite a few of them in the past. I think the earlier ones did play more similarly to each other, but they did make some small iterations and improvements to the games with each one that was released, but I think once they released the Marvel version of this game, that's when they really stepped it up and made some significant changes that really made this game a lot more desirable to me, and this one further builds upon that and also adds some ways to make the game even more difficult, which I am always a fan of. But if you are wondering why I don't have any Zombicides in my collection, despite being a fan of the series, I do have a couple reasons for that. One being negative and then the other being less negative. But the first one is that I do actively dislike some of the earlier Kickstarter versions of the game because the game was never really designed to properly incorporate the Kickstarter content. With those earlier games, you had your zombie deck, and then you'd get all this extra Kickstarter content, and if you ever wanted to mix up the abominations and zombies that were within your deck, you actually had to remove cards and add in cards equally so that you don't mess up the compilation of that deck. That was always just too much effort for me for the type of game that this is, so it always made that deck really, really swingy, which wasn't a great experience. This is something that they did fix in the later versions. I think this started with the Western-themed Zombicide, and they actually started adding a separate abomination deck and then an equally distributed number of neutral abomination cards into the main deck, so then when you drew drew one of those neutral cards, you just would randomly draw an abomination from the abomination deck. This allowed you to keep the proper ratio of abominations in that main deck, but then still offers you the variety of the amount of abominations that you have, because you could just shuffle up that abomination deck and you just see different abominations depending on what shows up from game to game. I also had a lot of issues with Zombicide Invader as well as Zombicide 2nd Edition, so I just don't recommend those two versions of the game. But the second, less bad reason that I don't have a Zombicide currently in my collection is simply because I have Cthulhu Death May Die. It has enough similarities to Zombicide that I don't really feel like I need a Zombicide in my collection. But Cthulhu Death May Die does have a bit more overhead with it, and it also doesn't feature a DC or Marvel theme, so there are still a lot of good reasons to grab Zombicide over Cthulhu Death May Die depending on your tastes. But if I was to add a Zombicide into my collection, it would definitely be this one because, like I said, I think they really amped up the formula with Marvel Zombies, and this one only further iterates on that system. It's not a huge change from Marvel Zombies, and I think you could technically mix them together, although I don't think they officially advertise this. And the second reason that I would pick this one over Marvel Zombies is just because Marvel Zombies had way too much content in it that I don't think I would ever dive into. Marvel Zombies was more focused on playing as the zombies, and then they did also offer you another mode where you could play as the heroes, but this one is only focused on playing as the heroes, which is pretty much the only mode that I'm interested in. But one of the big differences that I think makes the Marvel and DC versions of Zombicide much better than their predecessors is the way that the heroes work, because each of these heroes are actually going to have different abilities that are unique to them and thematic to those specific characters, whereas in all of the previous versions of Zombicide, there's essentially a pool of different abilities, and then each character basically gets a randomized set of those abilities, which means that you could find the same abilities across multiple different characters, which created the problem of all the characters feeling very similar to each other. This was further exacerbated by the amount of characters that were provided in those games. There is so many characters across multiple boxes taking up extra space on my shelf when they didn't add that much more to the game. And you'd probably be right to think that I probably should have just got the retail version of the game instead if those are my issues with it. But I didn't have issues with the additional abominations other than with how they were integrated into the game, which is fixed now. And I didn't have an issue with the extra missions, and I would like to have all that stuff, and I would also like to have the extra characters as well, if they played differently enough, which was my hope when backing the game, but it just wasn't a reality, and I didn't know that until I had the game in my possession. But that being said, I'm really happy that there's two versions out now that fix almost all the issues that I had with those previous versions, and that is basically the reason why these are the two that I would pick and the two that I would recommend. But if you are wondering the difference between this one and Marvel Zombies, I already did mention that this one is not going to have a mode where you can play as the zombies, so if that's what you're interested in, you might want to go for Marvel Zombies instead. But this one will have characters both in zombie and non-zombie form, but only the non-zombie ones will be playable by the players. There's also no plan to have a giant miniature in this one. I know they did have a giant Superman at one of their conventions, but that was purely there for display. It's not going to be offered on the Kickstarter, and at this moment in time, there's no plan to make a giant mini. But similar to Marvel Zombies, there will be the bystanders in the game that will be appearing on the board either during setup or throughout a scenario. And of course, the zombies will be targeting them, but it will be your job to try and protect them. And this is where the bystanders work very different in this game, because once you have rescued a bystander, they actually join up with your hero, moving around with them on the board and remaining on the board. Players will be gaining different benefits and abilities depending on the bystanders that they have with them, but the bystanders also understand how important it is to keep the heroes alive if they're going to have any chance at humanity surviving this zombie outbreak. So if push comes to shove, these bystanders will sacrifice themselves if it means saving your character. There's also a couple changes with the items, with more opportunity to take advantage of your environment, using whatever you find to fight back or hold back that zombie horde. And then there is also a new item type known as equipment, and these are very rare and powerful items that might have belonged to a hero that is no longer among the living. And these are going to be granting some very powerful buffs or acting as very powerful weapons, but each player can only ever equip one of these at a time. And like I said, they are very rare to find. In order for players to activate their hero's special abilities, they're going to be spending power from the power track located on the left-hand side of the board. And this is just going to be power that increases incrementally each and every round. But there are also other ways that you can increase this through the use of items or from abilities from your bystanders. But something that's interesting about this game is that in the DC universe, a lot of the heroes don't actually have any special supernatural powers. Instead, a lot of them are just super fit people. For example, Batman's just a super fit and really smart human, but in zombie form, he's just pretty much a fit human, which doesn't make for a super threatening abomination in terms of strength compared to like a superhero that you might find in the Marvel universe. So you will see some more creative effects for these types of abominations where going up against them might limit the amount of options that you have when doing so, or it might even lower your morale, in effect lowering the amount of power that you have access to. Not only that, but there might also be some negative effects after the fact if your hero was the one that had to take out a zombie that was formerly their friend. And if the previous Zombicide games just weren't difficult enough for you, this one is introducing something called Nightmare Mode, where it's not so much about completing the mission, it's more about seeing how far you get. But if you do want to complete the mission, you're going to have to exploit everything the game has to offer and take advantage of any opportunities you can and make as few mistakes as possible. I'm sure a lot of you that are interested in getting a Zombicide are probably wondering whether you should get this version of Zombicide or the previous Marvel Zombies version of the game. And like I said, these do play very similar to each other, so you should probably just pick the one with the theme that you like more. But in the interest of giving you the most information that I can, I did cover the Marvel Zombies previously when it launched, so I'll go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And even if you aren't interested in Marvel Zombies, it'll give you a good idea of how DCeased plays, because like I said, these do play very similar to each other. And right out of the gate, we're already seeing the differences here, and there is a lot to be excited about because you're actually going to be playing as the zombies in this rather than the heroes. But you can also play as the heroes as well, and I'll get to that shortly. And with the main core box, you can only play as the zombies, so if you're only interested in that mode of play, they are providing you that option. And the Command team is trying to stay as true to the Marvel storyline as possible, so there's going to be a lot of little Easter eggs, and if you're familiar with that story, you'll see that a lot of elements from the story will transfer over to this game accurately. Of course, it's not going to be 100% accurate. To make a game well designed and as fun as possible, there's going to have to be some compromises with certain areas, but from what I've seen so far, it looks like they've done a really good job of balancing the two. And since you're playing as the zombified version of these Marvel heroes, you're going to be fighting back against anyone that isn't a zombie yet. The main threat is going to be the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and they're going to be taking place of the different runners and walkers from the previous Zombicide games. And then any of the superheroes that haven't been turned into a zombie yet are not playable, but instead they're going to be acting as the abominations in the game. So they're going to be the big threats that are swinging in to try and take you out. Of course, you wouldn't be a very good zombie if you didn't also have that insatiable need for flesh and brains, and you will be able to fulfill those needs in this game, and the way that you do that is by attacking different bystanders. Different bystanders are going to show up throughout the game, and they're going to be basically different characters that you would see in the Marvel Universe, but all those characters that don't really have any powers. And players will need to seek these characters out and devour them in order to keep their hunger in check. And the way that hunger works in this game is that you have a scale from 1 to 4, 4 being your ravenous state where you completely lose control, and your character is just automatically going to start moving towards whatever is closest to them in order to try and feast on their flesh. That can put you in a lot of danger, so normally you don't really want to get into a ravenous state. But hunger isn't all bad because we all know how tired and lazy we can get after a big meal. And it's exactly the same in this game. Players are going to have more power and aggression if they can keep their hunger up. So you do want to keep your hunger at a high level, but there's a little bit of a push your luck aspect here because if you get too hungry, you're going to get into that ravenous state, which is going to end up with your character having a bad time. And another really interesting change that they made with this version is that they got rid of that randomized power system and instead created powers specific to each character. So if you're playing as Iron Man or the Wasp or Captain America, you're going to have special abilities that are specific to your character and thematic to the powers that they have in the Marvel Universe. And at first glance, this might sound like a little bit of a step back because you do have less flexibility with upgrading your character than you did in the previous Zombicides, because in the previous ones, as you leveled up, you'd actually have a couple options of do you want to level up this way or do you want this power instead. With this one, you're a little bit more stuck with the character that you have, and I think that's an awesome change. I know with previous Zombicides, I didn't really care which characters I used because there was that flexibility and they all kind of had just a randomized version of a subset of powers, so they didn't really feel that much different from each other. But I think the variability in this Marvel Zombicide is more focused on the different characters, so if you want to have a different upgrade experience, you can just play a different character the next time you play the game. And one thing I know about CMON is that there's going to be a ton of different characters to choose from. And I think this little change here is going to do an excellent job of actually making all the characters feel different from each other. So I think this little change is actually a huge improvement. And also like that the card has everything you need to know about how the power works, so you don't have to go back and reference to the rulebook like you did with the previous Zombicides, because everything was kind of just a keyword because they tried to jam so much in a little space. And I guess I'll just go ahead and say it, but this is also my pick of the week as well. I really like all the design changes I'm seeing with this version of Zombicide, and I really like that they're staying true to the story. And I also just really love the fact that all these little geek culture niches are amalgamating into what this has become. I think CMON did take a little bit of a risk here, focusing on the zombie element of the Marvel Universe. That's something that's largely unexplored in mainstream media, and also gives us a little bit more of a mature theme, and also puts your heroes in a position that a lot of people might feel uncomfortable with who follow along with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which for a lot of these newer Marvel fans has been the only exposure that they've had to the Marvel Universe. So I'm just really proud of CMON for going in this direction and for taking those risks, and I know that they get a lot of flack, but I really do think they're doing an excellent job here, and I'm going to give props where props are due. And there's one more huge detail that I haven't even mentioned yet, and if CMON gets this right, this might actually be my favorite game of all time. And this is going to put this game in history if they're able to do it, and I think this is going to be all of your picks of the week. And that big detail is that, wrong tab, is that Ash from Army of Darkness is actually canon to the Marvel Zombie story. So if CMON's trying to be as true to the Marvel story as possible, we might actually be able to pull out that chainsaw and boomstick. I'm serious, I really want this. And yada yada, there will be a giant Galactus miniature as well, and it's going to have an interchangeable head and arm to turn it from zombie and non-zombie form. And one question that I think a lot of you are going to have is, will there be both zombie and non-zombie versions of each of the Marvel superheroes? And the answer is no, with the exception of Galactus and Silver Surfer. For whatever story elements that they have associated with that expansion, those are going to be coming in both non-zombie and zombie versions. I don't want to spoil anything, but some aspects of that aren't exactly canon to the story, so CMON is making some executive decisions here. Of course, this is CMON, so there will be all sorts of stretch goals and add-ons added throughout the campaign, so I won't be surprised if they do end up adding both zombie and non-zombie versions of each character, but at least in the core box, that is not going to be offered. You also might be wondering, what about all the weapons and items that I picked up in my previous Zombicide games? Is Captain America going to go ahead and pick up a Molotov cocktail, or is the Hulk going to pick up a machine gun? Well, that one actually would make sense. But the answer is no, they've completely got rid of those items. They don't really tie in thematically and it wouldn't really make sense. So they've done something a little bit different, and what they did instead is that you can get these different zombie traits. And it does work almost the same way. You're going to be spending an action to get these traits, and you can hold only 2, but you can swap them out throughout the game if you want to change it for something else that maybe is a little bit more strategic depending on the situation that you're in. So now you should have a pretty good idea of some of the changes that were made in this version of Zombicide and how it differs from some of the previous editions, and also why a lot of those changes were made. But now you're probably wondering, how do you play as the non-zombie superheroes fighting against the zombies like you would in a typical Zombicide game? And the answer to that is that you're actually going to be playing a completely separate standalone game that's also going to be released in this campaign, and that is the X-Men Resistance. So if you have no interest in playing as the zombified version of the Marvel heroes, but you do want to have that Zombicide superhero experience, this is a great option. And of course, this version is going to be playing a little bit differently. You're not going to have that hunger meter at all. Instead, it's replaced with a power meter. And it's not just a one-to-one swap. It actually does work a little bit differently. And once again, I want to give props to CMON here, because this isn't just a theme swap. They actually did change some of the core mechanisms. And while the hunger system was a little bit more focused on push your luck, this one's going to be a little bit more like resource management. Your power meter is still going to be 1 to 4, just like the hunger meter, but your power is going to be recovering over time, but you can also use actions to try and power up as well. And then you're going to be able to spend those power points in order to activate special abilities of your character, which are going to be more epic and awesome the higher power level that you are. And another cool thing is that bystanders still do play a part in this game, but instead you're going to be trying to rescue them. And if you're unable to do that, the whole team is going to get some negative consequences with that. You are superheroes, so it's really not great for morale to see a citizen get eaten alive. And a really cool thematic way that they integrated the bystanders into the game is that when you draw that card to see which zombies are going to spawn in which locations, some of those locations might spawn zombies that are already chasing a bystander and have ran into the area that you occupy. And that's a really fun way to integrate the theme. And even though this X-Men Resistance is a standalone game, you can use it as an expansion to the Marvel Zombies version of it, and you also can use Marvel Zombies as an expansion to the X-Men Resistance. And what I mean by that is that you can use the superheroes from this version as abominations in the other version and vice versa. So really great work here from CMON. I'm really impressed, and this really did exceed the expectations that I had for yet another Zombicide game. I think it's really awesome that they're making the minis multi-purpose so that you can share them across the game. I wish that was something that more companies would do. I really like to see multi-purpose miniatures because inherently that means that there's less miniatures overall than if you decided to make everything individual. And then that's just less plastic in this world. And I know we're talking about a game that has a ton of plastic in it. It is what it is, but I do like to see every piece matter. And it also means more opportunities to use those miniatures and get them out on the table and see them more often, which is always something to be happy about. But I am super excited to see what they do with this campaign, and I really do hope that Ash makes an appearance. But if they don't, they did actually feature him in previous versions of Zombicide, so you can take solace in knowing that he does exist in the Zombicide universe somewhere. At the very least, I hope they include a player card for him, and if you're interested in that, make sure to spam the comment section on their Kickstarter page because they do tend to listen to their backers. And once again, if you want to check out the campaign for yourself, once again, you can go ahead and click to get notified if this one interests you. And I have links to this and all these campaigns in the description below. And the next campaign launching on the 14th, we have Sea Beast, and this plays 1 to 2 players and takes about 20 to 45 minutes to play. And this is a solo or cooperative game where players are Vikings trying to deliver cargo across a beast-infested water. But it looks like there's going to be some different beast cards that are going to be appearing with some different stats and abilities on them, and players are probably either going to have to avoid them or fight against them to try and get to their destination before either losing that cargo or completely sinking the ship. Like I said, not a whole lot more info on this one, so if you are interested to know more, I'm sure this will be updated with a ton more info once the campaign actually launches, and you can find a link to the campaign in the description below. Also on the 14th, we have another Viking-themed game, and this one is called Gates of Niflheim, and this plays 1 to 2 players and takes about 20 to 60 minutes to play. And this one is a cooperative dungeon crawl style adventure game where players are going to be playing through an entire booklet that's going to be providing the different maps and dungeons that the players are going to be playing through. I really like the style of dungeon crawler because it really keeps down the overhead for jumping into the game since you already have the maps all pre-made for you and presented in a nice little booklet. And this one does take further advantage of that by providing any specific scenario-based rules or objectives on the adjacent page, along with any potential skill checks or decision points that the players might have to encounter, and the outcome of those could change the trajectory of the story as you play throughout the campaign. Some areas of the page might also have different doors or pathways that players can interact with, which will bring them to another page in the booklet, allowing them to explore that area. And of course, there will be a ton of enemies to discover as well, and combat in this game is done through dice rolling, but you'll be able to find different items and gear that you'll be able to use during combat, and the different gear and weapons that you do have could change the amount of damage that you do, but also modify the amount of dice or type of dice that you get to roll. That's all the info I have on this one right now, so I hope that gives you a good idea of what to expect with this one, but if you do want to dig deeper into the details, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below, and of course you can follow along to make sure you get that coin added to your pledge completely for free. Also launching on the 14th, we have Wasabi, a game of raw skill, and this plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play, and this is the next game being offered by Kids Table Board Games, which in my opinion creates some excellent games, and the nice thing about these games is that they always have really nice artwork, and they always are able to play for younger age groups, but then they're still fun for a lot of adults as well. This one is a little lighter on the spectrum, so just keep that in mind depending on what you're looking for, but this one is a tile placement game where players are competing as sushi chefs. On your turn, you're going to be drawing a tile from the shared supply and then placing it anywhere out on the sushi board. You're trying to do all this in order to complete the gold cards that you have in your possession in order to create different recipes and then cash those in for victory points. but if you are able to get the ingredients in the exact order that's outlined on the card, then you're also going to be getting some bonus victory points as well. Anytime that a player completes a card, they're going to be adding a Wasabi token to the shared pool. And this is interesting because each one of these Wasabi tokens is going to be worth 1 victory point at the end of the game. And the way that you get this is that if on your turn you put one of the tiles out on the board and you're not able to complete one of your goal cards, then instead you are allowed to take all the Wasabi tokens that are currently in that pool. And you do also get to take one of the special ability cards that you can see here on the right of the board. Is really nice because no matter what you do on your turn, you're always going to be rewarded. But of course, if you're not able to complete one of your goal cards, it's always nice to try and time that when there is as many Wasabi tokens in that shared pool as possible. When players add new goal cards into their hand, there's a few different piles to choose from, with each having a different number, and the number indicates how many ingredients are required to fulfill that card. So the smaller ones are easier to fulfill, but they're also not worth as many victory points, so it's up to the players to decide how much they want to push their luck and try to determine what they think they can complete before the end of the game, because the end of the game is triggered once this board is completely full, and then victory points are going to be tallied based on the cards that you completed, added to any Wasabi tokens that you managed to take into your possession. The player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. If you are interested in this one, I will have it linked in the description below. Also on the 14th, we have a new expansion for the game Ahoy, which plays 2 to 4 players and takes about 45 to 75 minutes to play. And this is a game that was previously released by Leader Games. And if you are familiar with Leader Games, you know that they have a history for making some wildly asymmetrical games like Root, Vast, and Oath, and many more. And this one is no exception, but this one is a much smaller package. So if you found those other games just a little too intimidating or just requiring a little bit too much investment to dive into, this one might be one that's worth checking out if you do want to have an asymmetrical game, but doesn't require as much overhead or as much knowledge to just jump into and play competitively. And I'll just come out and say it that I am not a big fan of games like Root with this wild asymmetry. And that doesn't mean that I don't respect them or think they're not good games, as long as they're played correctly. And that's where my issue comes into play. In these types of games, it's like every single character has their own rule book, and it's up to the player playing that character to not only understand the rules, but to also make sure that they're playing their role properly within the game. Because if they get a rule wrong, or if they're not chasing the proper incentives, this can wildly imbalance the game and can cause some other character to win and you to lose for reasons that are completely out of your control, just because one player either played incorrectly or just didn't play with the right strategy to keep the other players in check. But I do also acknowledge that the more that you play this game and understand the rules and understand each character's role within the game, that issue does become more and more insignificant. And when you get there, these are excellent games, but the novelty of each player playing just a slightly different game than the other isn't really that enticing to me to begin with, so I am normally not too interested in this style of game. And the whole reason that I'm saying all of this is so I can completely contradict myself when I say that this one is my own personal pick of the week. And there's a few reasons for that, but I do want to start with saying that there are a few mechanisms out there that I'm usually not a big fan of. For example, I'm not really that big into Take That games, but then Cosmic Encounter is one of my favorite games of all time. So just because a game has a certain mechanism that I usually don't like, doesn't mean that they don't do it in a way that I can enjoy. And I can't be for sure about this one until I actually play it, but just from my understanding of this game, it does look like it's done in a way that I actually would enjoy. For starters, this is a game that takes 45 to 75 minutes to play, which means that you could play this game multiple times in a row before you've even learned a game like Root. That means that players can get up to speed way faster, and the overhead on learning this one is quite a bit less, especially because this game does play up to 4, but there's actually only 3 different factions that you're going to be playing as, and if you do have a 4th player, they're going to be playing as the same role as one of the other players. Also, between these 3 factions, you're generally gaining your points either by area control or pick up and deliver. The overall rules for this one, as well as the differences between the characters, are also quite a bit smaller than those giant asymmetric games, which just means that players will have an easier time understanding their role, along with the different roles of the other players, which means that you'll have a lot less surprises when you play this game. When you think you have the best strategy ever, then all of a sudden somebody does something that you're just like, you can do that? Which, yeah, only happens a handful of times when you're learning a game like Root, but I would much rather that it happens 0 times. But this is a game where players are trying to earn the most victory points at the end of the game. And like I said, there's a bunch of different roles and they all have a few differences between them and some different options and mechanisms to take advantage of. But primarily they're going to be gaining their victory points through either area control or pick up and deliver. Cool thing about this game is that there are multi-use cards that are going to be appearing throughout the game, which function both for the pick up and deliver characters, as well as the characters going for more area control. The top portion offers some sort of action if you were to buy that card into your possession, whereas the bottom portion of the card provides some sort of objective for you to deliver a certain item to a certain type of island. What's cool about this is that each of these islands are going to be located on different tiles, with each of those tiles having a blue die in the center. The die represents the value of the islands on that tile, and whichever player is able to take control of those islands is going to be gaining that many victory points for that island. The cool thing here is that every time that the pick up and deliver character delivers an item to one of those islands, it's actually going to be increasing the pip of that die, making the value of those islands a little bit more if you are able to control them. And this is one of the areas where the different characters are interconnected. And yes, this is one of the areas that could have that issue that I talked about, where basically one player playing their character incorrectly could basically kingmake one of the other players. But the reason that I don't think it's as big an issue in this game is because the way that you should play your characters are a lot more straightforward, since this is a bit of a lighter game. But then also all the other characters will have a good understanding of the impact of the other players' decisions, which means that you can pretty much table talk and try to convince the other players that, hey, you don't want to do that because you're going to be helping that player who's in the lead, which opens up a whole bunch of opportunity for players to try and influence each other and convince them to make the decision that they want them to. And in my opinion, this is a great aspect to any board game because you do want more discussion, and this starts to become part of the strategy of the game. If you've ever played a game like Cosmic Encounter, you know how much of that game is trying to convince the other players why they should or shouldn't do another action, regardless if your intentions are completely factual. So basically, if this is an issue in this game, I think the rules on this one are simple enough that the players will just self-correct for it at the table, so I don't really have any concerns here. And with everything I've said, you pretty much already understand the game here, where you're either trying to make deliveries to certain islands, which then increases the value of the islands in that region, or you're a player that's trying to put their influence on those islands to gain the victory points that they offer. But how do the players actually do that? And the way that this works is through dice worker placement. At the start of a round, players are going to be rolling their dice, and then you're going to be taking turns placing 2 dice at a time, activating the actions that you assign those dice to. Of course, some of the actions will be influenced by the value of the die that you place there, or they might even be limited to certain values, limiting the options you have on your turn. Players can also get into battle with each other, and whenever they do that, they're going to be causing damage to their opponent's ship, which can cause them to put damage markers into some of the placement spots on their board, blocking them out until they take a repair action. Some victory points you can track as they happen out on the board, but then there's some portion of victory points that remain hidden until the end of the game, so just because the other players might be ahead of you at a given point, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are currently winning. The new expansion is going to be adding a few new factions into the mix with the orcas, the turtles, and the pirates, and I do believe that they are still going to be scoring points in those same core mechanisms of either pick up and deliver or area control, but they're going to have a few different options with how they do this. There's no exact details out yet, but they did give a couple clues to what you can expect. One of the factions is going to be able to surge, giving them power when they launch in a straight line, while another faction is actually going to be able to catapult their crew onto various islands, and then the other faction is going to be able to devour and rob their way to fame. So if this one does sound interesting to you, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. And of course, you can find more details on the game as well as these individual factions and anything else new that this expansion is going to be adding to the game. Also launching on the 14th, we have Heroes of Ilirium, and this one plays 2 players and takes about 30 to 60 minutes to play. And I don't have a whole lot of info on this one, but I did also think it was launching a couple weeks back, so I did already film footage for this one. I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. In this game, players are going to be using heroes to combat against each other, with each hero having their own combat deck, and each hero can actually be leveled up into 3 different forms. But something that's neat about this game is that players aren't just going to be choosing one hero deck to fight against another hero deck. Instead, each player actually chooses 2 different heroes and combines those forces together. Players are going to be using those cards, trying to upgrade their heroes in order to defeat their opponent. But every single round there's going to be some modifiers that change the mechanisms of the battleground and create some different situations that players will have to adapt to. Like I said, I don't have a whole lot more info on how this one plays, but if you do want to learn more, I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. Also launching on the 14th, we have the Aetherial War card game, which plays about 1 to 3 players and takes about 60 to 90 minutes to play per session, because this one is a cooperative campaign card game. In this game, each player is going to be playing as their own unique characters with their own starting stats and abilities, but then players are going to be using deck building to change their arsenal as the game goes on, and then of course work together to make their way through the sci-fi world. The whole premise with this one is that there's an evil empire taking over the galaxy, and players are the last of a thought-to-be extinct race that has the ability to take advantage of certain magical powers. Of course, with great power comes great responsibility, because this is putting you in a position where you and the other players are pretty much the last hope in trying to fight back against this empire. But this is a game that plays over 3 different acts that are going to be presented to the players through various decks of cards, and each of the acts are going to be comprised of 2 different missions with their own unique goals. Players are going to be playing through these until they get to the end of the act, where they're going to be presented with a randomly drawn event card that can have different outcomes or decisions for the players to make that can change the trajectory of the story. Some of the cards will present players with different skill checks or bring different enemies into battle, and in the case of skill checks, like I said, each of the characters do have different stats, so some characters will be better at some skill checks than others, depending on the stats that they require. Combat's resolved by the attacker rolling a die based on their attack stat, and then the defender rolling a defense die based on their defense. The difference between those 2 values is going to dictate how much damage gets through. Combat continues like this until either only the players or the enemies remain, and then of course the remaining side wins that battle. This is also a game that gives you a lot of flexibility with building your deck, because you can create a smaller, more specialized deck with very powerful cards, but then at the cost of not a whole lot of variety, or instead you could choose to build a deck of a lot of cards, giving you a lot of flexibility and options, but of course maybe not seeing the same card come up quite as often. As always, if you are interested in this one, I do have a link to the campaign in the description below. And also launching on the 14th, we have a campaign that's not exactly for a board game, but this one is instead for a magazine that is filled with a whole bunch of different types of puzzles. I don't have a whole lot of info on this one, but I did want to mention it because it is kind of board game adjacent. And this one is a little bit special because it has a really awesome offer here, giving you 2 free magazines for just the cost of shipping, which is €2 anywhere in the world, which is honestly a great deal. €2 for anything these days is amazing. And then also that does give you a bit of a taste of what these puzzles have to offer. So if you do want to get a subscription or even buy more of these magazines, you can have the confidence that this is something you'll enjoy. So I really love that this publisher is giving you this option. And now for campaigns launching on the 15th, we have Way of Thinking, and this plays 2 to 8 players and takes about 20 to 80 minutes to play. And this one is an interesting little cooperative word game, because in this game, each player is going to be dealt 7 cards, with each of those cards having a few different words on them. Players will be using 6 out of those 7 cards, and then choosing a word on each of the cards, trying to link words together that have logical connections. The whole goal here is to try and create a sequence of words that the other players will likely be able to guess, because the other players are going to be working together to try and decipher the words that they think you chose from each of the cards. You're going to be able to give them some clues by showing them the first and last card that you chose, and then the other players get to talk amongst each other and try and decipher the order and the words that you have selected. They're going to get 2 chances to try and get this right, but after their first try, you'll be able to put down some different hint tokens to give them some indication of how the cards might need to be moved in order to correct any of their mistakes. After the second attempt, you're going to be revealing the proper sequence of words and explaining the logic behind why you created that sequence and why it makes sense, which is always a fun aspect of any of these party games. But then, of course, you're going to be scoring points based on however many of the words the players got correct. Since this is a cooperative game, all the players get a chance to take on the role as the player deciding the sequence of cards, and then this is going to repeat for each of the players. And then you're going to just add up your total amount of points, and that's going to let you know how well you did in the game overall, depending on player count. And as always, if this one sounds interesting to you, I will have it linked in the description below, and of course you can click to get notified. And this next campaign is also a bit board game adjacent, but this one is the Tiny Tables campaign, and this isn't just a fun campaign. This is part novelty, part functional, because these tables just are cool to have and look at. But these tables are actually built out of solid oak, which means that they're probably nicer than a lot of real tables that I've owned in my life. But as you can see, you can actually make use of these for your dice rolling or holding different components, because there are little extensions that you can get to put onto the side of the table. And the cool thing about these little extensions is that they actually double as the cover for the table. So when you're not using it, you can store it away as its little table with all the little compartments put back into place on top. I don't think you're going to find too many games that you can actually play on the table, but it is always nice to have something to keep you organized with all the little bits and pieces and tokens that are involved in basically every board game ever. So if you are looking for something that will help you do that while also being a little bit fun, this is definitely one to check out, and I will have a link to the campaign in the description below. And that is it for this week, but don't leave yet, because as always, we still do have a ton of pledge giveaways to announce, and these are the easiest giveaways to enter ever. All you got to do is leave a comment down below. You don't have to sign up to anything. You don't have to like or subscribe or do any of that. Although if you think I deserve it, I really do appreciate it, and it does help other people find this channel, which is awesome for everyone, I hope. But the first giveaway we have is for an all-in pledge for Perseverance Castaway Chronicles. This is going to get you all 4 episodes, a ton of content, and this is a really awesome giveaway. So I just want to thank the publisher for donating this one. And what's so cool about this one is that it's pretty much offering you 4 different games that do share some core elements that will make them familiar to each other, but then they do have enough differences for them to stand out on their own. Not only that, but each of these 4 episodes are going to play thematic to the portion of the narrative that the overall game is trying to tell. And this isn't a heavily narrative game, but depending on the actions and decisions of the players, you are going to be playing through a bit of a story as you play through each of these episodes. The whole premise here is that the players have capsized their ship onto an undiscovered island that seemed to be frozen in time, because on this island, dinosaurs still exist and roam the land. The first episode, players are going to be trying to build up a foothold on that island, building up a bit of a camp and scavenging what they can from their surrounding area and from their ship in order to build up a bit of a settlement that will protect them from the dangers of the island. Of course, there's going to be a ton of dinosaur attacks, and players are going to have to defend themselves against those dinosaurs. But then in the second episode, the players have built up a bit of their settlement and have found more protection from the dinos and have found enough resources to allow them to survive there, but you're still going to have to go out into the unexplored areas of the jungle and bring back more resources in order to further build up your settlement and further establish a bit of sustainability within the island. In episode 3, players do find a bit of peace as they have fully developed their settlement and have found full protection against the island, but players have also discovered how to work with the island and even tamed some of the dinos to use as transportation to get into the more far-reaching areas of the island, or even use those dinosaurs as part of your settlement to build out agriculture and help to build and move some of your resources in order to build a thriving community. But of course, there's always a calm before the storm, so you don't want to get too comfortable here, and episode 4 is where things get hairy once again, because the player's presence on the island has now attracted the attention of the ancient beasts that have laid dormant around and hidden within the deepest, darkest areas of the island. Players are going to be backed into a corner here. Even though your settlement's in the best position it has been ever, these threats are much more significant than anything that you ever went up against, so you're going to have to be ripping out and repurposing parts of your settlement in order to fight back, but then also to build up a new ship, hopefully holding back the threats long enough so that you can escape with a crew that's able to sail the ship back to civilization. There is a lot of details to go into this one, so if you do want to know more about how each of the individual episodes play within the game, I definitely recommend checking out my previous video. And all you have to do is search Shelf Clutter, Perseverance, Castaway Chronicles, and it should show up on YouTube if you just search those keywords. And like I said, this one's for an awesome all-in pledge, and all you have to do to enter this giveaway is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Castaway, and you can leave any comment that you like, but if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know what the first dinosaur is that you would tame if you could tame any dinosaur on this island. For myself, I think the primary purpose of the dinosaur would be for transportation, and I think in this society you need to establish yourself with a sweet ride, and pretty much any of the land dinosaurs are probably going to be really bumpy and terrible to ride, so I would definitely go with the pterodactyl. Who doesn't want to fly around an island above everyone else on a smooth, slick ride? Plus, I feel like they don't eat as much, and I don't want to worry about gathering even more food, so I would definitely go with the pterodactyl, but let me know what you think and which dinosaur you think is the sweetest ride. Good luck in the giveaway, but like I said, we do have quite a few more to announce, and the next one was actually my pick of the week last week, which is a pledge for Valka, and this one looks like a really interesting card battler, because in this game you actually have 2 rows of cards, but you can only attack with your front row. But not only do you have a bunch of different characters that you can attack with, but you'll also be getting a bunch of different cards that can upgrade the stats of your character, but the only way that you can assign those cards is if they're in the back row. So you're going to be trying to manipulate your 2 rows of cards, trying to put your most powerful ones forward, but then bring them back before they die so that you can heal them, but then also upgrade them if needed, which creates this interesting puzzle where your front cards are a little bit more in the fray and a little bit less under your control, but then the back cards give you a lot of freedom to prep them and try and manipulate them to set up your side of the battle as best as you can to take out your opponents. And it looks like they are reminding me that I did say of all the games I'm going over with you in my previous video, this was the one that I was most likely to back, and as you can see, I did not back this campaign yet, but that is not because I decided not to. It's simply because I didn't do it yet, so let's go ahead and fix that. But I think this one's offering you a very interesting card battler at a very reasonable price point, and I am most interested in the 2-player mode of this game because I just like the head-to-head aspect of card battlers the most, but I know this one is offering you a few different ways to actually play, and I'm interested to check out the other offerings as well. I also absolutely love the artwork for this one. I think the rules are simple enough that I could just leave this box out in the open in my living room or something, and then whenever people come over and ask, what the heck is that crazy thing? I could probably teach this one in a couple minutes flat and knock out a couple games, no problem. And this giveaway is going to be for the only pledge offered on the campaign, which is a Kickstarter edition of the game that's going to come with the core game, as well as a few nice extras here. And under this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Valka. And as always, you can say anything that you want, but this game gives me very metal vibes, so maybe you could let us know what your favorite metal band is. And you can go across any type of metal. I know this is a very broad genre, but just choose the one that is your absolute favorite. I think for myself, it's gotta be Iron Maiden. They just always had a special place in my heart ever since I was exposed to them as a young, innocent child playing Carmageddon on my computer. And if you haven't checked them out before and you want to know which songs I recommend, Any of these here on the screen are amazing, but my absolute favorite by a mile is Hallowed Be Thy Name. It's such a good song. It'll get you pumped and headbanging in no time. And another giveaway that was also my personal pick of the week is for a pledge for Saw the Jigsaw Trials. And this one is a really cool game where players are not only victims of the different trials in this game of Saw, but players are also creating the different trials as well, because each player is basically trying to become the next Jigsaw. But the way this game works is that there are 3 different types of cards, and there are a whole bunch of these cards within the game. But what's so cool about it is that you're going to be combining these cards together to create a unique type of trap. The different cards that you combine in order to build up these traps are not only to determine the type of stats that will work best for trying to disarm the trap, but it's also going to determine the type of damage it does and to which body part, because players are going to be taking damage to each of their individual limbs, and even completely lose those limbs if they take too much damage to them, which will cause them additional bleed damage every subsequent turn. But the absolute coolest thing about combining these cards together is that each one has 3 different lines of a sequence of words, and then when those cards combine together, this is actually going to spell out the type of trap that you built and the way that the trap works. This means that there are a ton of different combinations of unique traps that you'll see every time that you play this game. When players do build these traps, they'll be able to assign them to one of the other players, and then that player is going to have to do one of 2 options. They can either try to disarm the trap completely by using the cards in their hand combined with any of their stats, and also by drawing the number of cards as indicated on the trap, with the hopes of trying to get a total stat value that is above the stats required to disarm that trap. Of course, this comes with a risk, because any amount that you get below that value, you're going to be taking the difference and then taking damage equal to that amount, which could end up being even more damage than if you just activated the trap the way that it was intended to begin with, which is one of the other options. So if you think you have no chance of disarming the trap, you can always just activate it the way it's intended and just eat that damage and do the best you can, possibly losing some limbs along the way. But I really love the trap building in this game, and I always am a fan of Push Your Luck, so this looks like a game that I would be a big fan of. Of course, there are some other cards that players can gain throughout the game that have some special effects, and the last player standing wins the game. And this giveaway is going to be for a collector's edition pledge of the game, which is a really awesome pledge, not only because you get the Kickstarter edition of this game, but you also get a collectible severed hand. And yes, this is life-size, so there's a lot of fun to be had freaking out all of your friends. And to enter this giveaway, all you gotta do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag SAW. And I don't want to bring up any trauma here, but maybe you could just let us know of your most recent injury. I feel like most injuries should be pretty mild and shouldn't be bringing up too many bad feelings, but I don't injure myself too often. I feel like I'm pretty careful. A lot more careful than I used to be. But as a lot of you know, I did just move into my new house, and by new I mean it was built in 1976. So of course it was a little outdated, and I am pretty handy, so I've started doing a few renovations, and the biggest renovation I've been working on is ripping out a supporting wall. It just so happens that these old walls were built with basically roofing nails. And also I did most of this work in what I like to call my construction crocs. As you might have guessed, they don't exactly have steel soles, and I ended up stepping on a nail that went straight through the crocs and into my foot. In case you're wondering, I did manage to survive, and luckily for me, I did already have my tetanus shots, which is always a concern if you're being impaled by a rusty nail from 50 years ago. No, I didn't learn my lesson, and I still do wear those Crocs. And the next giveaway we have is for a pledge for Misty Waters. This one is a interesting one, especially if you're interested in the open sea, because this one is a sandbox game where players are going to be sailing their various ships, trying to accomplish various objectives with multiple ways to win this game. Basically, there's going to be a bunch of different islands that players can explore, a bunch of naval ships and pirate ships that players can fight or try to commandeer, And of course, lots of dangerous weather and sea monsters for the players to go up against as they explore the open sea and even take control of some of these various islands. And a cool aspect of this game is that almost everything that you own in this game can be upgraded. You can upgrade your ships and you can upgrade your individual crew, and you can even build up artillery on islands you control in order to gain more control and power over the surrounding waters. Each of these upgrades are going to be opening up new opportunities for you and new ways that you can navigate the board or fight against the other threats that the ocean has to offer. This giveaway is going to be for the core box and all unlocked stretch goals. And to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is leave a comment down below with the hashtag Misty. And you can leave any comment that you like, but if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know what you would name your ship. For myself, I think the Shelf Clipper is an excellent ship name, and you got to sport your own brand. One thing to note about this giveaway is that it is going to be offered worldwide, but they're only offering free shipping within the EU. So if you're outside of that, you will have to cover any shipping and customs charges. And I just want you to be aware of that before entering into this giveaway. But this is still not the last giveaway for this week because we still have 3 more to announce. But I'm going to speed things up here and offer these 3 over on the Discord. And the first giveaway we have here is for the GameToppers campaign, and they're offering a whole bunch of different accessories on the campaign. There's the actual game tables, as well as a ton of different options for playmats of all sorts of different sizes. And if you're wondering what they actually look like, this is actually a GameToppers playmat that I have on my table here, and it looks fantastic. And they pretty much have every size that you could need to fit on any type of table that you have. I also have another mat inside this table, and I love both of them. I do recommend them if you are in the market for a playmat. But they're also offering a bunch of other accessories as well, and the one that we're going to be offering in this giveaway is the Game Topper Double Game Tote. And these are actually my own personal favorite board game bags because I don't need a whole lot of bells and whistles with my bags, and I really like these simple versions that they offer because they actually collapse really well, making them very easy to store when you're not using them, and they don't look too over the top that all my non-board game friends start to question who I am whenever I show up with one. You can definitely find more luxurious board game bags out on the market, but you're also going to be paying a ton more for those style of bags, and honestly these ones are more than enough to get your board games from point A to B, and I don't think you really need to spend a whole lot on transporting your games. You're really only using these to carry them to the car and then carry them out of the car. Sometimes simpler is better, and for my personal taste, I like these simpler bags, but if you do own one of those more expensive, more luxurious ones, definitely no regrets there. They're going to last you a lifetime, and they're also going to do a bit of a better job protecting your games if you do have some sort of accident or if you end up dropping them down the stairs or whatever can happen during transportation. But like I said, all you got to do to enter this one is check out our Discord in the description below. Head over to the giveaways channel and then click the emoji underneath that giveaway. That'll get you entered into the draw, which will be automatically drawn at the end of the week. And for the next giveaway, we have a pledge for the 13th Street Crew. And this is actually a game that I thought looked like a ton of fun, and I was really hoping to see them smash their goal multiple times over. There's still a good couple weeks to go with this one, so we'll see what happens. But this is a game that I thought looked really well designed. And if you've ever played games like Moonrakers, I think this one is very similar to that, where players are trying to complete different missions, and you can essentially invite other players to help you fulfill the requirements of those missions. The difference with this one is that not all the players are necessarily on the same side, and they might have different goals that they're trying to achieve in order to win the game. Each player can win the game if they're able to raise a certain amount of money, and players can work together to time that so that they do win at the same time. But if you happen to be an informant to the police, then you can only win the game if you're the only one to reach that threshold, or if you're able to get the crew caught enough times by the police. Of course, some of these missions are more difficult than others, and some are more rewarding than others, and players are going to want to invite enough of the other players so that they can actually fulfill that mission, but then they don't want to invite too many that they're splitting the reward in too many different ways. Because there's that push and pull that all the players are going to be dealing with, and they don't know exactly which of the other players are working with them or against them. It does give the player that's acting as the informant a little bit of flexibility to try and blend their actions in with what the other players are doing, and try not to reveal who they are until they feel like they're able to get away with it. The price on this one is also super affordable, so if you are interested in it, that's always a nice perk. But we are doing a giveaway here, and this is going to be for a copy of the game. And like I said, to enter this giveaway, all you got to do is head over to the Discord, check out the giveaways channel, and click the little emoji underneath that giveaway, and it'll be automatically drawn at the end of the week. But the last giveaway we have here is for a coin offered by the Coinsides, and they have already delivered on a couple campaigns previously, offering you 2 different types of coins, and this one's the 3rd in the collection, with the first one being their standard Coinsides coin, the second one being a Cthulhu themed coin, and this 3rd one is going to be more cyberpunk themed. But in a nutshell, you can use these to roll basically any type of die that you want, because there's a bunch of different numbers around the perimeter of the coin, and you can just spin it and then throw your finger on it and stop it, and wherever that coin stops turning next to your finger is essentially the value that you rolled. This means that you could use this coin for any situation where you need to roll a die, including D&D, although I probably wouldn't use it specifically in D&D for that application, just because dice rolling is a little bit more straightforward and easy, especially if you're rolling multiple dice at once. But I think this does work as an amazing prop in any type of campaign game that you might be playing, because there are a lot of different options to use this within a campaign. It's always nice to give some props to the players as they're role-playing through whatever campaign you have set up for them. And I think this is so cool because whatever sort of power you associate with that coin, you can then allow the players to spin it, and then the outcome of that spin can scale it up or down, turning it into something that could be very, very powerful or a spectacular fail. Something that I personally use this coin for is as a replacement for a sand timer in any sort of game that has sand timers, because I just think this works so much better. And the way that you use this as a timer is you basically just spin it the best you can. And then once it topples over, that's when your timer ends. And that might sound like a bit of a novelty, but the cool thing about this that a sand timer doesn't have is that the better you spin it, the more time you have. So it does kind of gamify the timer in any game that you're playing, allowing for players to try and spin that timer a little bit better to get a few more seconds added to their turn. There's still a bunch of other uses for this coin that you might find useful, especially if you're running role-playing games, because you could use this to track different stats. You could use it as a cipher to solve different puzzles or riddles, and each of the coins do have some unique words or symbols printed on them that you could use in various ways. For example, the Cthulhu coin can be used as a magic 8-ball, but then this new one actually has the different alignments printed on it with good, neutral, and evil, which allows you to get creative with that. Maybe in an RPG, if you're running into different creatures or animals, you can just spin the coin to determine if they're going to be aggressive, friendly, or just your typical skittish animal. And it's the same thing with this one. Just head over to the Discord in the description below, check out the giveaways channel, and then click the little emoji underneath that giveaway. These will all be drawn at the end of the week, so feel free to enter, and good luck in the giveaways. But now let's go ahead and draw the winners from last week's giveaway. And the pledges we were giving away last week was for the Gilded Realms, Ynaros Fallin, and Timelancers. And to draw a winner, I use this fancy application here. All these extra names down here are bonus entries for my Patreon subscribers. If you appreciate all the work and effort that goes into each and every one of these videos, and there is quite a bit of work between the research, the editing, and the filming, partially just because it's a ton of work, but also because I'm really bad at it still, and it takes me forever and multiple takes that I need to crop together. But I still do it because I love you guys. But yeah, if you can help me out, I do appreciate it. And I do have a link to the Patreon in the description below. And it does also get you a nice perk with some bonus entries into these giveaways. But the first giveaway we're going to draw for is Gilded Realms. And I already did draw the comments because I've been having so many issues with this comment picker. It still says that it doesn't work, but it looks like it does. So let's just roll with it and see what happens. So let's go ahead and draw the winner. And the winner is Nicola S., who is one of our Patreon subscribers and is also one of my first Patreon subscribers ever. So I just want to thank you so much for all the continued support, Nicola. I'm glad to help win you a really awesome pledge here with Gilded Realms. Hope you enjoy it. The game looks fantastic, and it looks like a game that I would personally love, and I'll reach out to you and get that pledge all sorted out. And the next pledge we're going to draw for is for the pledge for Ynaros Fallin. So I just updated that hashtag. And honestly, there weren't a whole lot of comments on last week's video, so I am expecting probably all of these to go to Patreon subscribers just because of the ratio here. But let's go ahead and see what we end up with. And the winner for Ynaros Fallin is Chris Spites. This is kind of funny here because Chris actually is a newer patron, just joining a couple months ago. So we're getting the full spectrum here. But congratulations, Chris. I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a nice little pledge. And then the last giveaway was for Timelancers, but this one was actually run over on the Discord. And if you scroll up a bit on the giveaways channel, you might still be able to enter that giveaway because we still do have about a day left from the time that I post this video. So if you're watching this early enough, you can go ahead and check that one out. I mean, we currently have 4 giveaways on the Discord, and there's not really much you have to do to enter these. So it's a pretty sweet system we got going here, and your odds of winning are actually really good because we normally only have a couple hundred people enter each of these. So if you want to win some giveaways, feel free to jump in on these, and you don't have to worry about joining the Discord and then getting spammed with a ton of different notifications because I have all notifications turned off on the Discord by default. You will get notified if you win the giveaway, but that's pretty much the only notification that I have. But the Discord is actually really awesome if you want to stay up to date with all the upcoming campaigns because it does get updated with all the new campaigns as we discover them. And also, if you do want to get notified anytime that a new game is added or anytime that a new giveaway is added, you can opt into notifications just by clicking the proper emojis under the roles channel. So if you do check out the Discord, you're not going to get spammed with a bunch of notifications, but if you do want some notifications, you can just choose the ones that you want to opt into. And we put a lot of work into this Discord to get it to where it is today, but this is honestly the #1 best place on the internet if you just want to stay up to date with all the upcoming Kickstarter board games, because literally every game that I ever talk about, we add to the Discord first. And every game that launched last week or is launching this week is all categorized into the appropriate categories here, including every game that I just mentioned to you here in this video. You can check it out on the Discord before I even turn on the camera, which I think is pretty dang cool. And that is everything I have for you this week. Still quite a lot of games launching every single week here. And it's funny that I know things are going to be slowing down in December, and I just kind of expect that it's going to taper into the slowdown, but that just isn't the case. We're going to have a ton of games. And then December hits where everything just stops and falls off a cliff and doesn't crawl back out until the new year, where everything just picks right back up again where it left off at the beginning of January. This year's been a crazy one, especially in these last few months. I didn't run the numbers or anything, but my gut tells me that we are seeing a record amount of Kickstarters. Maybe we'll see a little bit of respite in the next year, but I also wouldn't be surprised if it just continues to be crazy. And honestly, I don't mind because I do feel like the quality of board games has been improving over the years. And even though there's more games, it doesn't seem like the content is being watered down in any way. So I've been really impressed, which is honestly saying a lot because I'm honestly more of a glass half empty kind of guy, so it usually does take a little bit more to impress me. And honestly, these campaigns have been knocking it out of the park. There's been so many sleeper hits and so many games that I wasn't expecting to impress me as much as they actually do. Because I'm on a super tight budget this year, I haven't been able to back nearly as many games as I probably would have if I had a bit more freedom in that regard. But it still just makes me so happy to know that there's so many cool games out there and so many games coming out that I would love to try. And I do hope to run into a lot of these games that I wasn't able to back at some point in the future. It just gets me even more pumped knowing that those opportunities are out there. Definitely an exciting time to be a part of this hobby, and there is a lot to look forward to. But until then, as always, thanks so much for watching. Keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.
Oh.